Hello, my name is Ian, and today we're talking about German Molz's Tasting and Imagined Thailand, Authenticity and Culinary Tourism in Thai Restaurants. First thing to think about when we think about this wonderful article is that this is all about this questionable idea of authenticity, really, and how it relates to tourism. This is all about Thai restaurants, as the title suggests, and particularly Thai restaurants in Dallas. It can be any restaurant, any sort of ethnic cuisine. We'll use it in as many scare quotes as we wish, but it's basic. But this happens to be the group that she is basing it on, her sample. So she begins with sort of reminding us about some John Urry's stuff about the tourist, in that for the much of the time, we are in that realm. We cast our tourist gaze, using his word. We seek out otherness. One of the ways that we do leisure, really, a significant way that we do leisure, is by seeking out difference, by seeking out otherness, by seeking out something that is different from the day-to-day. There are other forms of leisure, certainly, but touristic leisure is one of them. And again, not necessarily in terms of travel, but in terms of experiencing. And I believe that's probably on the increase in the later half of the 20th century and into the 21st. One of the ways that we build status and create status is this idea of going out and experiencing otherness merely for the sake of doing so pleasurably. And we do so really through restaurants, a lot through restaurants, not exclusively, of course, but we really do that when we're doing restaurants. She makes this case that one of the things that we're doing when we are experiencing otherness through restaurant, it's a form of identity work, that I am basically not simply making sense of who I am, but projecting who I am, that there is a performativity that happens when we go into restaurants. And so they are theaters, as it were. And she uses this idea of stage a lot. She's basing this on two different realms. One is she's basing it on Dean McCannell's work on the tourist, and his notion of sort of staged authenticity. His idea is that the tourist is motivated by this hunt and this pursuit of the authentic other. And that is their prime motivation. The tourist seeks out the authentic other, and yet, alas, will never find it. They're only going to be able to find these things which are simulacra of the real. And that is sort of predicated on this idea that there actually is an authentic out there. And that's something that other people have challenged, and Molz is challenging it in this. But the idea that as we go, either, specifically as we go to other places, and literally travel, or as we do so through the staged events of restaurants, we're only ever going to get these stages. And for McCannell, stage is a derogation. He's being dismissive when he talks about something being staged, because he immediately equates, like, staged authenticity is basically oxymoronic, that it is inauthentic authenticity for McCannell. But it's good to think about these stages, and we can think about the restaurant as a stage, and that's basically Molz's initial approach, that the restaurant is this stage wherein culture is presented. And there is, within restaurants, at least the hermeneutic of authenticity. And so it is, to a certain extent, trying to meet that quest. So she's not dismissing McCannell entirely out of hand. But she talks about front and back stages, and using Irving Goffman's idea that a restaurant is as we go through the world, we are engaged in what he calls, in the title of the book that this is drawn from, the presentation of self in everyday life, and that we engage with others according to roles, according to scripts. We have specialized spaces that facilitate the meeting of performance teams. And so, a performance team can comprise a team of one and a team of one, but restaurants are this really great illustration for this. In fact, Goffman uses restaurants as an illustration of performance teams. So the idea of applying Goffman to restaurants naturally makes sense. So as you walk into a restaurant, It is already a stage. It is literally decorated in a way that suggests otherness, suggests some kind of performance. There are decorations on the wall, there are people in costume, and there is this performance of authenticity. They are trying to cater to the customer's desire for authentic experience, using her word. And she's basing this in part on Lucy Long's work. In fact, this is a response to Lucy Long's work on culinary tourism. And so the idea that these techniques are in play, just to repeat what Long talks about, where we have framing, again, sort of, naming the event, framing the event is literally sort of putting it on some kind of stage. The naming of things in a way to give form to them, explication in a way to give additional narrative detail, and then through processes of menu selection and through processes of recipe adaptation. She points to the menu not simply in terms of a list of what the restaurant serves, but really as a guide, as a document that is part of the communicative message of the restaurant, which will do things like, for example, in Thai cuisine, will do things like indicate the spiciness of dishes through little things like chili peppers, 1, 2, and 3, depending on how hot it is. We'll use sly text to explain the nature of the authenticity. They will name or rename, they will translate or transliterate the names of these foods in order for you to have a grasp of what they are. And as such, they are, again, they're not simply lists of food, they are presentations of a cuisine. There is adaptation. There are things that are tacit. There's the idea of, she gives the example of often with in fried rice in Thailand, there's a fried egg served on top, which is not necessarily common or not necessarily what Thai restaurateurs imagine their Western clientele are interested in, because it might be, it's only a fried egg, but eggs are for breakfast. So it's sort of one step beyond the easily communicable, but they will still do it. It's like, oh, okay, if you like it this way, it can be done. So, but it's not necessarily in their primary document of the menu. The ingredients, they have claims to authenticity, claims to where it comes from. They might substitute the local when necessary, and again, the local not simply in terms of a North American mushroom in lieu of a Southeast Asian mushroom, but also in terms of catering to local styles. Again, this kind of different form of menu substitution where particular body parts might be excluded as not part of the ingredient list. So again, dropped when things disappear. I talk about decor, or I've already mentioned decor, but in the Thai restaurant, there's the use of Thai fonts, there's the use of travel posters, there's pictures of the king, either the current king or a famous king from the 19th century, and statuary in a way that resembles what Thailand is. And you can substitute the word Thai for Chinese, for Japanese, and you see this in most North American and arguably most global incarnations of restaurants that are framed as ethnic for perhaps a metropolitan, but a local an audience that is extending beyond that community. So this is not Thai restaurant for Thai Americans. It is a Thai restaurant for non-Thai Americans. This extends into things like the costumes, the uniforms that are being worn, which would be, on one hand, sort of practical concessions to being a uniform in terms of delineating quickly the performance team of who comprises waitstaff and who does not, but also indicates certain forms of Thai dress, whether or not that's actually reflective of contemporary or even traditional Thai dress, but really it resonates with those sets of expectations. Remember some of our core terms that we deal with when we're talking about folklore and we're talking about tourism, and this notion of the sort of reflexive esotericism. That one of the things that is sought out, one of the things that the restaurateur is creating, is they are trying to meet the expectations. They're trying to present not the Thailand that is actual, but the Thailand that is meeting the expectations of Thainess of their clientele. So again, the esoteric, exoteric, our classic William Hugh Jansen terminology, where esoteric is what we know, and exoteric is what we know about them, and esoteric is what we know or what we believe they know about us, and then the reflexive esoteric of what we believe we think about them. And it's this reflective esoteric, what we think they think about us, our presentation in the world. That is what restaurateurs are meeting when they are trying to meet the tourist gaze. That is what they focus on, to make it palatable, to make it acceptable, but also to capital O otherize themselves. So that's like the first part of the chapter, and which is really great. It could end there and it would be a nice description of this. But then she takes it on a twist, because one of the things she challenges McCannell on is McCannell is basically saying, look at all this stuff, isn't it fake? And again, as if there is this real out there, as if there is this pure authenticity by which these things can actually be measured, and who has access to that authenticity by which these things are measured. Instead, Molz suggests that there's actually this process of negotiating authenticity, that the restaurant is basically a text. It is something to be interpreted, and each person going into it is going to be making their own claims or assumptions about how authentic something is. And what they are doing is they are bringing their understanding of Thainess to it. And so what they're bringing is that, just as we always talk about in folklore, you have this stage, this text, and this moment that they are ongoing. And it's not simply going to be the restaurant, although that's critical, but the particular meal at that restaurant and the particular people who are present at that restaurant, and the way the food is prepared. If it's a bad night, that could affect things, but that's more of a random thing. We want to talk about sort of the actual moment and who at that table are collectively negotiating the authenticity. She even refers to the idea that people will often defer their judgment to other people at the table who might have greater experience of Thai restaurants and of Thailand itself. The people who have been to Thailand, they will start talking about how inauthentic or authentic a particular place is. And they will judge it based on their Thai experience, with the assumption that the Thai experience that they have in Thailand is inherently authentic, and it is truer to some kind of ideal, which is already begging the question of, is authentic Thai a thing? By what measure? What are you asking for when you're asking for authenticity? Is a restaurant in Bangkok authentic or less authentic than one somewhere deeper into the country? What is the authentic thing that is being represented at any given moment? And in all this sort of series of turtles all the way down. That's what the expression is. So this text is engaged with. This restaurant is critiqued. These restaurants are critiqued, and people are trying to figure it out. So she kind of asks the question whether this question of authenticity is important at all. And there's two different ways of answering that question. And one is it important that things are represented in some kind of authentic way? And if so, who is the arbiter of that? Or is it basically that these are an ongoing process, that authenticity doesn't really have any measurable quality, and therefore it is two teams, the restaurateur and the individuals at the particular table, who collectively are negotiating an experience. And that experience, that one particular meal, is really going to have a judgment associated with it, and it's going to be brought into their collective understanding for the next time they go have a Thai meal, and that this isn't just an ongoing, self-correcting perhaps, but at the very least, cumulative way of being in the world. So there are various ways that authenticity, again now firmly in air quotes, is evaluated. That authenticity, again, is this sort of way of assessing experience as opposed to anything that can be done on a quantifiable way. It is a subjective judgment. And clientele who have been to Thailand or who have much greater experience will be, as I said, typically deferred to by people who have less experience. But even those who have little experience with direct encounter with Thai cuisine, that doesn't mean that they are complete blank slates. They will have, I've heard, or I've read cookbooks, or I've seen cooking shows, and so I have an expectation of what I am going to have. My expectations might be based on a completely different cuisine that I associate with. It's like, I don't know Thai food, but I know Chinese food, which is again sort of a cultural polyglot category of ethnicity, or I know Japanese food, or I know whatever. And at least I have an experience of ethnic food. And so my criteria is largely going to be based on how I imagine this to fulfill those same qualities of exoticness, whether or not I actually have a gustatorial touchstone for what constitutes Thai. But I probably know things like coconut milk, and I probably do definitely know things like spicy. One of the reasons that I know that Thai food is spicy is because a spicy cuisine is often a four-letter word in New York Times crosswords, and the answer is invariably Thai. One of the things that I notice myself doing when I go into restaurants is judging the authenticity of the place by my perceived ethnicity of other clientele and the wait staff and the owners. And it's like, well, clearly this place must be authentic Chinese because Chinese people are eating here, which is probably on the cusp of racist. At the very least, it's prejudicial. But I think, nevertheless, it probably is a criterion that we bring to these occasions, almost almost subconsciously. It's like, oh, well, this is, and the idea of, and this is where the locals eat is one of the ways that we measure an authentic place when we are traveling there. So the idea of this is where this ethnic group eats is an indication of authenticity, all in quotes, in a multicultural community like Dallas or like Sydney is, it's, again, it might not be a forgivable, but it is a natural consideration that we might bring into it. And that's kind of key, especially when we start talking about like the staff and like our hiring decisions based in part on the idea that people are going to judge the authenticity of this place based on this set of criteria, which is a kind of a fun and awkward question to answer. Whatever the question is of authenticity, it's always going to be taking a secondary stage to palatability, because if the food is not good by the very subjective standards of the people themselves, good in terms of quality, good in terms of catering to tastes, it doesn't matter how authentic or inauthentic it is considered. It's like, oh, this is a great restaurant. It's completely unpalatable, but it's just like what happens in Thailand. That's not going to cut it. It's not going to cut it in terms of whether people are going to recommend it to their friends, and it's not going to cut it in terms of what kind of authenticity the restaurateur wishes to present. So. But the flip side is true. I don't know how authentic this place is, but my gosh, the food is amazing there. Or I love these tastes. I don't understand them. I don't know how true or false it is in terms of this sort of ideal that is presented. Nevertheless, I like the food, and so experience is going to be one of the qualifiers. As much as people will defer to the measurement of this food's authenticity, people are not going to defer to other people's tastes. They're like, well, okay, maybe this is the greatest thing in the world, I just don't like it, or vice versa. Maybe this is pablum. Maybe actual Thai people would reject this food as almost an infamia, but nevertheless, I find it tasty, so this will become part of my regular haunt. And we're going to be judging our restaurants based on that. And again, this is much about how we express, as we are being experiential, or as we are experiencing otherness throughout the frame of leisure, through our culinary tourism enterprises, we are going to be, we are talking about ourselves. We are having experiences that are, at least as far as we are concerned, potentially transformative. And that helps us create our identity. I am a person who eats at Thai restaurants. I don't know about you. Do you eat at Thai restaurants? Well, I eat at Thai restaurants. Look at me. And I'm putting it in the realm of a kind of vanity, but I think nevertheless, it's I'm an adventuresome person. I'm a cosmopolitan, and these are one of the ways I do it. And I do it through food. She introduces, but the other way that she challenges McCannell is this idea of that the tourist is motivated by this quest for the authentic. And she, I don't know. Because one of the things she does, then she takes Eric Cohen's idea of these various levels of tourist, who are differently motivated. It isn't taking McCannell and saying that everyone is motivated by this desire to experience the other, the authentic other. Because some might be, but some that might not be a consideration. That might not be a criterion by which they evaluate their satisfaction with a tourist experience. And so Cohen takes this. Molz takes Cohen, and identifies the existential tourist, the one who basically almost wants to lose themselves in the experience of otherness. You imagine sort of like the ultimate backpacker, the ultimate sort of going off and finding oneself, like The Beach with Leonardo DiCaprio. That kind of I'm going completely elsewhere. And then sort of just below that is the experiential, someone who is still looking for the truly other and tries to seek out things that are clearly not meant for the tourist gaze, or at least prepared for the tourist gaze. So, and you see this a lot in terms of in a post-Moltzian world. You see this a lot, so like food bloggers and YouTubers and going out and the fascination in the past 5 years with international street food. It's like, this is the real stuff in the videos of people making street food. The stuff that is inherently not part of the tourist enterprise. Anthony Bourdain's travel show, expressly beyond the standard restaurant fare of a tourist, including going to places that are typically not tourist places to begin with, let alone sort of the back streets, the back stages, as it were, of contemporary of cities that are otherwise are tourist fueled. The experimental is the one who's looking for the truly other, that kind of Anthony Bourdain type. The experiential is someone who is still motivated by others. And again, now you can perhaps be thinking of they have a different set of criteria for restaurants, but again, there's like these they still want a comfy bed. They still want that kind of tourist experience. Then there is the recreational and the diversionary. The recreational is just there, more or less. They like otherness, but they're not really motivated by this desire to experience some kind of authentic thing. They're there. They're fun. They're more than open to it, but it is not necessarily the reason they go there. And then there is the diversionary tourist, who's really just there for funsies. They just want something that is different. They just want something different. Authenticity is not necessarily a question. And you shouldn't necessarily dismiss. All 5 of those people can be catered to, maybe not by the same restaurant, but by different restaurants. And so you can have, fast food Thai. It's like, we can just get this or we can get this. Do you want to have Thai food? Sure. And the question of authenticity isn't even raised, which is much different from different kinds of restaurants with different kinds of clientele who are bringing different kinds of questions, at least at this particular moment, to their immediate practice of culinary tourism. And the last thing she talks about is this notion of the post-tourist, based in postmodernism, which takes this idea of the authentic, which is still, I mean, she's already sort of poked holes in it, but basically the post-tourist is not motivated by a quest for the authentic or gradations of that quest, like the Eric Cohen stuff. More than anything, they are amused by the idea because they do not believe necessarily that the authentic exists. So what they are participating in is the spectacle. They are participating in the stagedness of it. They know that at the very least they cannot judge whether something is authentic or not. They know, or at least they presume, and I would say I agree with them, they know that in almost any situation, it's already going to be a series of signs, especially since the authentic is a judgment that we put on others. It's a contemporary judgment. It has nothing to do, it's a Western creation. It's an outsider's creation, really. And when we start thinking about our own authenticity, so on, and what is authentically our group, we are already in that discussion, more or less motivated by the idea that we are interested in what other cultures are bringing authentically to the fore. So, post-tourists, they're there for the spectacle. It doesn't mean that they do not appreciate the food. It doesn't mean that they cannot experience otherness on a very intense scale, but they're aware that they really have no criteria for any kind of actual judgment, and so they participate in it knowing that they cannot judge. It's not ironic, although irony can creep in around the edges. It is not cynical. It is just knowing that there's an unknowability there. I might as well experience this without a desire for some kind of existential moment, or without being motivated by that, without rejecting it because it doesn't meet some kind of arbitrary criteria that I can't even necessarily back up as anything other than my own subjectivity somehow being elevated to a standard that I demand other people obey. Oh yeah, that's good. I remember a couple of years ago, there was this wonderful article in the New Yorker, and it was about sort of the intense craft beer and the extreme beer markets and microbreweries in the United States. And the reporter went over to Germany and was talking about sort of the home of beer and the various different levels of beer making there, and the history of beer making, and those laws and guidelines about what comprises authentic beer and so on, and was talking to like a brewmeister, someone who has spent their entire life being a master of beer, and they asked them the question, "What beer do you? Are there any American beers that you like?" And he sort of paused a second, and he said, "Budweiser. That's a good beer." And the reporter was devastated because Budweiser is like, and it's that, it's sort of the perfect example of an American commercial brewery. And then he's like, "No, it's a good beer. It just doesn't meet my standards because I'm bringing these standards into it of somehow what real beer is." It's like, well, it works. It's good at what it does. And he was devastated. And I think that's kind of the question, that the post-tourist enjoys their Budweiser because it is good, because it fulfills the criteria of taste, because it has associations with it, which one can participate in, ironically. And it doesn't mean that one only enjoys Budweiser. It's just that one does not enjoy Budweiser based on criteria that they can't meet. It's like, I will enjoy Budweiser in the same way that I will enjoy this arcane craft brew that's made out of birds. Anyway. So I love Molz's article. It's one of my favorite ones when I teach my food and culture class, and I cannot recommend it enough. Its name, again, just for those who like having titles kicking around, is Tasting and Imagined Thailand: Authenticity and Culinary Tourism in Thai Restaurants by Jennie, Germann, Molz. My name is Ian. As ever, my friends, I wish you nothing but the best. Be well and eat well, and I will see you later. Bye-bye. Because T, H, A, and I are handy letters to put into a crossword. Ed Asner is also a very popular answer, but not to "this is a spicy cuisine" and is not 4 letters long.